Enter Nelson Mandela. So we have whitewashed Nelson Mandela, or Gandhi-washed Nelson Mandela. I think the average person thinks he was a pacifist who did passive resistance. That is nonsense. That is ludicrous. It's to the point of, oh my God, dude, read a book. Nelson Mandela in 1952 was trying to convince the African National Congress, the ANC, to create a military wing and begin killing people and fighting back and doing insurrection. He failed to do it in 1960 in the aftermath of the Sharpeville massacre. Here him and Sisulu, another top ANC member, go back to the ANC and go, it's time. We need armed insurrection. And a group of men get together to create the military wing of the African National Congress. This is Mandela's idea. He's been pushing for it for 8 years. Stop with the, oh my God, he was like Gandhi and did passive resistance. He wanted to do active violent resistance. He doesn't quite get as much in as he had been planning on. In any case, they create, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, Umkhonto we Sizwe, which is the military wing of the African National Congress. Most people just call it MK. And so MK is created. One of the guys who makes MK is a guy named Joe Slovo. Joe Slovo is of Jewish Lithuanian background. So he's a white guy who had been part of the South African Communist Party. And when the ANC decides to make this military organization, he's like, I'm your man. And he had left South Africa to go fight in World War II. So he had actual combat experience, and he came back, and now here he is. He's like, let's do this thing. And he will end up being one of the top generals in the ANC all the way to the end. It's worth pointing this out. It's really kind of interesting. Jewish South Africans, as a percentage of the population, is relatively small. As a percentage of the anti-apartheid whites is gigantic. Jews are way overrepresented in the anti-apartheid movement for white people in South Africa. And so there's this weird little element that sort of pops in this process, because later on down the road, South Africa and Israel are going to become notorious allies. And so here's this irritating little problem in that the South African population isn't exactly fond of its Jewish white population. And that contradiction doesn't get resolved. Apartheid ends. So Joe Slovo and these guys are working on how to start doing this. Well, Slovo actually approaches the Soviets, and he starts getting armament and training. They begin working about getting across the border to other African countries to set up training camps. There are Soviet volunteers coming with equipment. Nelson Mandela himself kind of goes on a tour of African states. He's trying to bolster support. He's crossing back and forth across the border. The South African authorities, 2 years into the project, figure out where Mandela is. They set up a roadblock. They catch him. He will spend the next 27 years in prison. So when I say he didn't commit the kind of violence he had planned to, it's because he got caught 2 years into the project. This is absolutely devastating to the ANC, especially its insurgency movement. It doesn't really recover for a few years. It takes a while before they can kind of get things going. Joe Slovo is running around. He doesn't get caught. So there are people who manage to get away, but there are people who end up getting caught. 1966. So remember I told you Verwoerd is this guy who is sort of the architect of apartheid. He's part of the Herzog government. He's the guy who's kind of pushing, okay, we need to do this law next. So he's seen as the father of apartheid. 1966, he is in the Senate as the prime minister. He's in the Senate, and an ethnic Greek, so a guy who is of Greek descent, walks up to him. He whips out a knife that he had been carrying on him, and he stabs Verwoerd to death on the Senate floor. He stabs him 4 times before the other senators could jump up and pull this guy off of him. When he testifies later in his own trial, he says, "We had to stop apartheid. Here's the father of apartheid. I didn't think twice about it. I don't care what you do to me. I don't care if you kill me or you don't kill me. I don't care if you torture me. I can die knowing that I killed this guy." And amazingly enough, he avoids the death penalty. I'm kind of blown away that he doesn't get the death penalty, but he doesn't. He avoids the death penalty. He does die in prison in 1999, but he did get him. There's an uprising. The uprising is the famous 1976 Soweto uprising. So y'all are too young to have the kind of emotional reaction that I have when I hear Soweto. In 1976, South Africa passed a law making it so that the language of the black schools would now be Afrikaans. When they made that, a bunch of students said, "No, we're not doing this." 20,000 children took to the streets, primary and secondary school kids. On the first day of protesting, there's a little bit of violence with the police. On the second day of protesting, about 700 children are shot to death by the police. They just massacre 700 children who are out protesting because they don't want to have Afrikaans be the language that's being taught in the schools. And of course, this re-triggers the insurrectionist faction of the ANC, which had a catastrophic setback when so many of its leaders ended up in prison. Now all of a sudden they're like, all right, we need to do this. And the ANC by this point has done the work to build that wing, especially with men like Joe Slovo at the helm making this happen. And so now we're going to start to get an open uprising. From 1976 to 1987, the ANC launches a bombing campaign. They're not doing passive, peaceful, Gandhi-style resistance. They are actively blowing stuff up. They go after police stations. Right, 1983, there is a bombing. I think it killed like 69 people. There are multiple attacks against the police. The black population goes into full-fledged insurrection mode. They're not passively resisting. They are actively fighting back in warfare. And the streets become dangerous, especially for the black population, because the South African government is very heavy-handed. They're coming after the black population. They're not passively accepting this shift in politics. But within the framework of the apartheid state, where the whites have literally all the power, they end up having a massive change in the government. There's a guy named P.W. Botha. P.W. Botha is trying to figure out a way to sink apartheid South Africa permanently in. And one of the ways that he realizes he might be able to do this is to pursue nuclear weapons. Now, he has a problem, and that is that the Afrikaners don't have the technical know-how to pull off making the nuke. But they do have the uranium that's necessary to make the nuke. Having said that, there's a country that does have the technical know-how to make the nuke, but doesn't have the uranium. Match made in heaven. So Israel had been working on the nuke on such a grand scale that they had actually broken into the Oak Ridge, Tennessee plant and stolen weapons-grade uranium from us and had it. And they probably had already detonated a nuke, or at least had made a nuclear bomb by this point, by 1979. So the understanding is they wanted to test it because they didn't necessarily know if their design worked. And then, of course, South Africa is like, you want to test it. We have a location you can test it. We have uranium. We want the nuke. Help us. You have the technical know-how. We'll share our weapons-grade material with you. By the time they're done, South Africa made six warheads. So when apartheid goes down, part of the process of transitioning away from being apartheid state is South Africa does hand over its 6 warheads to the United States. there's a warhead that a group of Afrikaners, a rumor that a group of Afrikaners kept a warhead. Who knows? The Russians lost how many warheads when the Soviet Union collapsed? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's totally believable. In any case, that's one of the things Botha pursues. And when you think about it, well, if you're worried about apartheid falling, who would you be dropping the nukes on? You know what I'm saying? Like, when you think it through, what were those 6 warheads for? They were for South Africa. There's no other reason to have those warheads. This was, oh, we can't have you? You can't have you either. We're leaving you in radioactive hell. So when you think about it, it's really an amazing decision to take that step. Like, we're going to make sure that if we fall, we're going to take you with us.